Okay, everybody, welcome back to day 2 of World War II weekend. We're happy to see you all here again. Without further ado, I'm going to move right along with our second day of the guest speakers. And our first speaker today in the briefing tent is Mr. Martin Fleisher. Martin served with the 9th Air Force 397th Bomb Group. He first flew missions from fields in southeastern England, and after D-Day moved to various other fields to support ground troops until VE Day. He flew 65 missions, including D-Day, through the Battle of the Bulge. Please give a very warm welcome to Martin Fleisher.
Well, thank you very much. I hope that everybody can hear me well enough, and if not, I'll just keep the mic a little closer. All right, I'm going to start with the fact that I was born 1920, which is quite a long time ago. And my father died when I was 6 years old, and my mother was left with 3 boys, and I was the oldest. And after a couple of years, she met some man who was a widower, and he had 3 children. He had 2 boys and a girl. And subsequently, there were 2 more children after that, so now I was the oldest of 8. When the war came along, everybody of available age had to sign up for the draft. And of course, I signed up for the draft, but I wanted to fly. I wanted to fly ever since I was a kid. Told my grandmother in Philadelphia when I was 5 years old, there's an airplane. 1926, you didn't find very many airplanes flying around. So anyway, I told her, I said, Grandma, one of these days I'm going to fly one of those. She says, oh yeah, sure I know. Okay. So when the time came to be drafted, I felt, well, I wanted to fly. So at that time, if you had 2 years of college education, you were accepted for flying training. And if you didn't have 2 years of college, you had to take an equivalency test in order to be able to become eligible. Well, I was a very poor student in high school. I didn't like it, and I didn't read very much, so my vocabulary was very limited. And the test they gave at the time, it was 65 questions pertaining to vocabulary out of 150. So I felt, well, I'm going to have trouble here. But I took the test anyway, and I flunked it. But in the meantime, I had started airplane mechanics school in Newark, New Jersey. There was an airplane mechanics school called Casey Jones School of Aeronautics. Has nothing to do with baseball, Casey Jones striking out. But anyway, when I was finally drafted, and they got me to boot camp to qualify me, they saw all of a sudden airplane mechanic. Oh, we need airplane mechanics. So they sent me right to airplane mechanics school from boot camp. So I went to school there, and I graduated second out of a class of 300. So it just goes to show you how a guy, which I felt was a ne'er-do-well, all of a sudden comes out at the top of the class. And the moral of the whole thing is, you have to like what you're doing, do it with all your faculties or whatever you have, but work at it, learn as much as you can, then you can begin to demand your own price. So anyway, they sent me to airplane mechanics school. Because I graduated second highest in the class, they took maybe 2 or 3 dozen of us, and they sent us to the Glen L. Martin plant in Baltimore, Maryland, where they were building the B-26. It was a medium bomber that they requested. They had a few bids out, and Glen L. Martin won it. And the main problem was that it went right from the drawing board to manufacture. And when they manufactured them, they just went right to the Army. So there was no prototype for them to check the airplane out. And as a result, there were a lot of difficulties. And the B-26 got a terrible reputation because they had so many losses out of that first 200 that they got. In 1 month, they lost 27 airplanes. It was mainly due to bad propeller system and other design qualities of the airplane. Well, they finally, somehow or another, Jimmy Doolittle came over. He was a long-time pilot even before Pearl Harbor. And so Jimmy Doolittle took the airplane up by himself, no other crew members, no co-pilot or anything. And he flew the airplane. He said he wrung it out, which is usually a term that they use. Where he flew loops and spins and rolls and everything else, which you never do with a bomber. And he came down and he said, the only thing you need is more vigorous training for both the ground crew and the pilots. And a few modifications. So when they corrected all these modifications and they finally got the airplanes the way they wanted, it took almost until the beginning of 1943, where they accepted the first airplanes at the beginning of 1942. So it took that whole year, and as a result, it became one of the best airplanes of the Air Force. With 139 missions, 139,000 missions or sorties, which is one airplane over enemy territory, they only lost 900 airplanes, which is only 1%. There's no airplane at any time in the Air Forces that had anything like that. Everything for the heavies and all the others was anywhere from 25 to 50%. And the airplane became extremely maneuverable, and in capable hands it could do almost anything. In fact, there's one pilot who was a right-hand man of Jimmy Doolittle who challenged an American ace who had 26 kills, challenged him to a duel. They had to call it a draw because he couldn't shoot the B-26 down, and the B-26 couldn't shoot him down, so they had to call the thing a draw. Now, this guy was an exceptional pilot, there's no question about it. And there were a lot of them like it. In our particular group, we had a bunch of guys who were flying sergeants before Pearl Harbor. They were instructors all during the time. They were trying to get these B-26s out and everything. And they wound up in our group because our group was the last one to be mobilized in order to go over to England for their tour. Well, anyway, I got my license in October 1st, 1940. And when I went through flying school, I wound up being 8th out of 325, which shows, again, perseverance, hard work. You like something, you can do it exceptionally well. So anyway, I got my pilot's license October 1943, and we did most of our training before we went overseas in Hunter Field in Savannah, Georgia. And I was a little bit of an experimental guy. I like to fool around a little bit, but nothing ever dangerous or anything. But I like to know where the roots were and how it was growing. So that's the kind of guy I was. So anyway, we had to fly our own airplanes. They gave us new airplanes. I had to fly our own airplanes overseas from the United States, and we had to fly the southern route, which is over the Caribbean, over jungles of South America, to the Ascension Islands, which are in the middle of the South Atlantic, to Africa, and then up into North Africa, and then to England. And we had just a crew of pilot, co-pilot. I flew as co-pilot. All the time I was overseas, I flew as co-pilot on my own volition. I flew co-pilot. I didn't want another crew of my own. They gave a lot of co-pilots new crews as there was new crews being supplied and old crews going home, because I didn't want to be the only one on an airplane going to war that had any experience, and all the others were a bunch of greenhorns. So I stayed with my guy. And I'm Jewish, and my pilot was German, and this was a conflict where the Germans were killing the Jews. But the thing is, he wanted me, I wanted him. We were satisfied. And we went through the whole war that way, very, very well. Anyway, on our way over, when we got to Brazil, we left from the most eastern town of South America in order to fly to the Ascension Islands. Now, normally there's 4 tanks in an airplane. There's 2 main tanks, one on either side of the fuselage, and just out of the main tanks, outside the main tanks, there's 2 auxiliary tanks. And in the bomb bays, we carried two bomb bay tanks, each with 250 gallons. And that was because the trip was longer than our normal tanks would take us. So these were supposed to help us and make longer runs. So anyway, the briefing officer told everybody it's fine, you don't need to give them all the information they needed for going across. And all they had rented navigators from Air Transport Command to navigate. So we had actually 5-man crew: pilot, co-pilot, radio engineer, and a mechanical engineer. And the navigator was there just to take us over, and then he was going to come back and do some more. So they start complaining they're never going to make it, because with the fuel consumption rate and all of that, they said, oh, we're never going to make it. And the briefing officer said, look, we've sent thousands of airplanes over and we haven't lost a one. So go ahead. Well, of course, a lot of them didn't believe him very much, and they were kind of anxious about going, but anyway, we took off. And we each flew about a minute apart. So it was probably 2-3 miles between each one of us. So anyway, we get out about 3 hours, And well, it's time to transfer some of the fuel from the Bombay tanks into the main tanks, because you're using all the gasoline in the main tanks. So told the engineer to go back and transfer some of the fuel from the Bombays to the main. So he starts it, and I have a gauge up front, and I'm checking the gauge and everything. Nothing's happening. Couldn't understand it. So I go back and I asked him, I said, what's happening here? So he starts to go back to look at the transfer system. There's a little window out of the navigator's compartment where the transfer system is. He looked out the window, and here's gasoline spewing out of one of the auxiliary tanks. So one of the valves had gotten stuck in the transfer system, and it was pumping into the auxiliaries, which were full, so it was spraying out through the vents. So immediately he transferred to the other Bombay tank, and it worked. So now we had to make a determination. Are we going to continue to go forward or go back? Because the trip was roughly about 7 hours. And we were out about 3 hours, so I figured, well, what should we do? Well, I figured I'm the big shot. I know all about this airplane because I was supposed to be crew chief on a B-26. I said, well, I know what to do. So anyway, the first thing I did, on an airplane you have controls which you don't have on a car. You can control the air mixture control, the amount of air and the amount of gasoline that has to be mixed to give you a proper measure for the power that you need. So I felt, well, the first thing we'll do, we'll have to thin the fuel air mixture out, get a little less gas with the same amount of air. So I just pulled the controls back a little bit, and the engine coughed, so I figured, uh-oh. So I'd wait a little while. It was flying fine, so I just pulled back again a little bit more, cough again, so I'd wait. So I felt, well, I can't do that too often, otherwise we'd be in the ocean. So I finally stopped with that. Then I felt, well, we were flying at 2100 RPM. Let's put it in reference, so to speak, put it in 6th gear. So by doing that, you just lower the RPM, revolutions per minute. So we reduced it to about 1850 from the 2150. So then we're lumbering along that way, and I felt, well, let's drop the nose a little bit. Drop the nose that we lose altitude at 25 feet per minute. And every minute you're about 3-4 miles farther down the road. So you lose 25 feet every minute. And we were flying at 7,000 feet, so we had enough room. Anyway, make a long story short, we get to the Ascension Islands, and we asked to come in without having to fly a landing pattern. And when we get down there and they checked the transfer system and all the fuel and everything, found out that we had more fuel on board than anybody else. See, because we couldn't use that 250 that was there, and we only used up 250 in the auxiliary tank and whatever there was in the mains. And that was a good lesson that we learned, which came in very handy in some missions when we were flying over France and doing our bombing. So anyway, we got there fine. But, well, there's another obstacle, which we thought was an obstacle. We had to fly up through Africa. Once we got to Africa, we had to go inland to fly through a mountain range. The mountain range was around 18,000 feet, and our airplanes were not rigged for flying that high in altitude. But they said, well, you go in so far, and then you make a turn, then you go up so far in so much time and everything, and at this particular point, you look out to your left, you'll see a gap at around 9,000 feet, and you'll be able to go through the gap. So, well, we followed the instructions, and now here we're flying between these mountain ranges. The mountain ranges are way up here, and we were way down here, and it wasn't wide enough if we had to turn around to be able to really make a turn, and wide enough to make a turn, because with an airplane, you're flying over 200 miles an hour. To go to make a turn, you've got to take 3-4 miles. And I don't think we had 3-4 miles between mountain ranges. So we were all a little anxious about what was going to happen, kept worrying, and then all of a sudden, sure enough, at that particular time we looked to the left, there's the gap. So we made our turn, got through the gap, and we got up to French Morocco in North Africa, and then then into England. And we started our bombing missions, our group started bombing missions in April 20th, 1944. And there's a lot of anxiety as far as what's going to happen, because we were all green. None of us had anything at all. But we were taught and learned how to fly in formation. Now the B-26, after all the refinements that they had, was very, very sensitive to the pilot's controls, and was very maneuverable. And you could make the airplane do almost anything. And especially when we're flying formation, there's nothing radical that happens. You just have to make sure you get in as close to the next airplane as you can, and you just stay in line with them. Just like two cars in two lanes, you just stay right next to one another, which you can in cars also. But with the airplanes, every time they started shooting flak, all of a sudden we got closer. And before you know it, we had a wingtip over wingtip. But each one was flying at a slightly different level. Lead flew, then the next one was off to his side about 5 feet lower, and the one on the other side was 5 feet higher. So if you overran him, you could overrun him because you wouldn't hit your wings because there was a different altitude. But if you went in or out, well, if you went in, you were in trouble. You went out, it was all right. So we had 6 and 6 and 6, which is a box. Had another box right about a quarter of a mile behind it. And then we flew this tight formation, and it took 15 seconds for the enemy to sight us until the time that shell exploded at our altitude. So every 12 seconds, we made a 30-degree turn. Now these turns were random. They weren't just in any specific direction. It was according to the leader, and everybody flew off the leader. When the leader made a turn, he could make three 30-degree turns in one direction, or 1 or 2, or whatever he wanted to do. So this way it didn't give the enemy a pattern for them to follow. And most of our targets were not really that heavily fortified. It was only the largest ones, and the ones that were most important to the Germans, where it was heavily fortified. And Paris happened to be one of them. And I was not scheduled to fly. Our crew was not scheduled to fly on this particular day, June 24th, 1944. And someone else flew our airplane because theirs was up for service. So and the guy was a very funny guy, the pilot and the other crew. His name was Moses Gatewood, and his airplane, the name was Holy Moses, because I guess he figured the Lord would be with him more than anybody else. So he was very happy with that name. Everybody else was too. And he was always the brunt of a lot of humor, and he was a very good humorous guy himself. So anyway, they went out on this mission to Paris, and the flak was very heavy. And every once in a while, if you ever watch any of the History Channel with some of the movies about some of these warriors, and they have some where some of these B-26 men were interviewed, and a couple of them always come out with the thing, the flak was so thick they could walk on it. And it's like a set phrase, so to speak. But sure enough, if you're in one of those very heavily fortified places and the flak comes out there, you do lose sight of the man you're flying on the wing of, just momentarily each time. So if you're not careful, and you're not astute, you're not on good solid alert, you're liable to have an accident. But fortunately, there's only 1 or 2 incidents that I know of where we had any mid-air collisions amongst any of the guys flying formation. And one of them in particular was due to the leader, because the leader, maybe a shot came too close to his airplane or whatever, and he got startled, and maybe his 30-degree turn was a little too abrupt, and 2 wingmen happened to collide and lost both those airplanes that day. Well, anyway, in Paris it was so heavy, we lost 4 airplanes that day, and one of them was ours, flown by Moses Gatewood. And they all managed to survive. Gatewood was never captured. He managed to evade the Germans because he let all his men jump out, and then he jumped out. A few seconds later, of course, he might have been 6-7 miles down the road. So they found all of the other guys right away. And when he landed with his parachute, a woman came out and grabbed his parachute and took off with it. Well, that's what you're told to do. If you're shot down, you're supposed to bury your parachute so the Germans can't find it. They don't know where you are. They don't know where you landed, so they don't know where to look. So, of course, she took it off. She took off with it, and he got himself in the ditch, and he covered himself up with a bunch of leaves. So this was in, it was in June, but evidently there were leaves there because he covered himself up with it. And he's lying there with a .45 in his hand, because that's the only armament the officers had. And he's lying in the ditch, and all of a sudden he sees the truck come riding by with his 5 crewmen. So, and then a few minutes later, a couple of soldiers walk around, kicking this, kicking that, looking here, looking there, couldn't find him. So that night, the Free French came back. The woman must have alerted some of them. The Free French came back and took him under their wing, and they stayed with him for about he stayed with them for about the whole month, 6 weeks or something like that. And they finally got them back to England. But what they did on the way they went from Paris down to the Pyrenees Mountains between Spain and France, and they got them over into Spain, and from Spain they took them up to England. And along the way they ran into a couple of firefights with Germans, because Germans, and he was bringing back some secret information that they had given him. Anyway, that turned out well, and we saw him there before they sent him back home. So that was an incident I missed. Another one I missed was in the Battle of the Bulge. Battle of the Bulge, Hitler had mustered whatever war equipment that he had. He had all these tanks who came in through the woods and broke through the lines, and the weather was bad from then on for about a week. And he must have mustered all the airplanes he could find also, because we went out on December the 23rd, which is the first clear day where airplane support could come out and support them. So we sent two groups of B-26s out, 36 in a group, with 72 airplanes. And they had to bomb a couple of bridges because the German tanks were headed toward a gasoline depot, which we had was a few miles north of the situation of the place where they broke through. So we sent our airplanes up there to bomb these bridges, and all of a sudden we got hit by 700 fighters, and they lost 26 airplanes, 10 from our group and 16 from the other group. Now, our particular group is phenomenal, or miracle, or whatever you want to call it. All during the time I was overseas, I flew 65 missions, and I was over there roughly from March until January of 1944, 45, from March 44 to January 45. And in all that time, I only saw one enemy fighter, and that happened to be one of the new jets that the Germans had developed, and somebody must have been out just on an orientation flight or something to get the feel of the airplane, because he was about 4,000 feet below us and going a different direction than we were going. So I knew he wasn't after us. And that's the only enemy fighter I saw in all that time I was overseas. Now I know that supposedly we were supposed to have fighters giving us escort, and we were told at what point we would rendezvous with our fighters. Well, I never saw any fighters. The only thing I could determine in my own mind is that they must have been up at a higher altitude just watching over us in case we would be attacked, and of course they would attack our enemy, because they would have the advantage to let the enemy come in first and they go right behind them. But I never saw any, because we were never attacked by fighters, and as a result our fighters didn't have to come respond. That's the only thing I can figure out myself that happened as far as that's concerned. But with all the experience that they had with B-26s in the Mediterranean and over the European theater, we had a higher kill rate against the Germans than they had against us. Whenever they were attacked, and they were B-26 outfits that were attacked by fighters, we had a kill rate where we shot down 3 of theirs before they shot down 1 of ours. So they didn't come after us anymore, they went after the heavies. And that's why, because the heavies were a little bit more sluggish, they couldn't maneuver to avoid anti-aircraft like we could. And when they're fighting against the enemy, they're not in formation the way we are. The way we flew formation, regardless of what it was, you never broke that formation. The only time you broke it, well, you didn't break it. You just, whenever we had a bomb run. We flew 90 seconds. Okay, gave the bombardier control of the airplane. For 90 seconds, he had complete control with his bomb sight. And as soon as he dropped his bombs, pilot took over again, and then we went about our business doing our maneuvering again. So that was the only time we were really vulnerable to any aircraft or to any aircraft guns or to fighter pilots. So, and our losses were that low. I think mainly because of the evasive action we flew. Well, anyway, to get back to that incident we had flying over to the Ascension Islands, there was a bridge south of Paris, which was only 48 feet long. And the Germans, we had been bombing northern France so much that they had very few ways of getting their supplies to the Normandy area, because we had bombed so many bridges and railroads and everything that they couldn't get their equipment there. But this one bridge south of France was still something that they felt they could do. So the range on our airplanes with a bomb load was about 4.5 hours. And this mission was scheduled for 4 hours and 10 minutes. So we only had 20 minutes to spare. So anyway, we went out on the mission. Normally we do fly 3,250 RPM, revolutions per minute, because with a bomb load you need a little bit more power, so normally we flew at a lower RPM. But anyway, we flew out and we dropped our bombs. After we dropped our bombs and we started back, well, I went through the same machinations that I did when we were going to the Ascension Islands, because I figured, well, we might run out of fuel, so I'll do what we did there. We'll come back with plenty of fuel. And in reality, that's what happened. 4 airplanes never made it back to the base. One managed to make a crash landing on one of the beaches, because this occurred a little after D-Day, and some of the beaches were in our hands. So he made a crash landing on one of the beaches. The second pilot tried to make it across the English Channel. He couldn't. So they had to ditch in the English Channel. He was a very strong man, very big man. So he was able to swim the distance between where the airplane went down and the English shore. And the rest of his crew perished. The last 2 made crash landings somewhere in England before they were able to get to their own base. And then, of course, you come back and you're debriefed after each mission to find out what went on, how it worked, and everything. Excuse me. And I told them about the experience that I had and what I did and everything. We had to go back 3 more times to bomb that same bridge, because it was only 48 feet long, and the Germans were able to repair it that fast. So now every time we went back after that, everybody came home, no problem. So one good experience, one bad experience, or both good experiences, I should say. So anyway, that was, in general, that's what most of my active duty or whatever it was during the war. Now, if there's any questions, and then after that, of course, I had my 65 missions. I went home early January before the end of the war. And everybody was always afraid when they finished their mission, went back, they were going to be sent to the Pacific. Well, some of them were at the beginning. So when I got back there, well, they weren't going to send me to the Pacific. They told me, well, they'd make me an instructor in Mississippi to teach guys to fly B-26s. Well, I didn't know if I wanted that either. So anyway, they felt, well, this guy has post-mortem depression with it. Let's send him to R&R. So they sent me to R&R, Plattsburgh, New York. And when May the 8th came along, they defeated the Germans in Germany. And all of a sudden, I got orders to go back to Atlantic City to get my discharge papers. I got my discharge papers and went home, because I had enough points for all the activities and overseas duty that I had. Needed 138 points. I had more than 138 points. So I got out of service in June 45, which is one of the earliest, I think most of them have ever gotten out. So that's my experience. Now, if there's any questions you want about the airplane, about anything else, I'll be too glad to answer them. Yes?
B-26 was in service all the way in Vietnam, right?
No. The B-26s, they started to fade out the B-26s in late 44 and early 45, because they had an A-20, which is a little smaller airplane than the B-26. It was referred to as a fighter bomber, because it was smaller and much lighter, and was much more maneuverable, so they could get into a firefight, so to speak, with another fighter. But the B-26 was too heavy for that. B-26 weighed 38,000 pounds. So you see a B-25 flying around here, which is a little smaller than the B-26 also, and that one has much less power than the B-26. That's why Jimmy Doolittle didn't take it off the carrier, because it's much too heavy. Otherwise, they would have used the B-26. And they started to fade them out. Well, first of all, our losses were so low they didn't need any more. They stopped manufacturing them in the fall of 1944. And then they started to bring these A-20s in, and then they eventually designated them as B-26s. And those are not B-26s, they're the A-20 converted. So they didn't do much to the airplane except maybe put in different bomb racks or something like that, and it continued until the end of the war. And all the B-26s that were in the European theater where I was, They were all taken to a field in Germany, and they blew them all up to give the Germans all the metal for their Lend-Lease program to try to build their economy up so that they could keep going. They did a similar thing in the Pacific where they sent a lot of whatever B-26s they had there, and they sent them to Australia, and they blew them up in Australia. The B-26 was in every theater of war, Pacific and everywhere. But in the Pacific, it was supposed to be a medium bomber. In the Pacific, they would use it for torpedo bombing, they would use it for strafing, they would use it for a lot of other things, and as a result, it was never as successful as it should have been. And so the B-25s took over a lot of the duties there, and other, bombers and stuff. And then they concentrated more in the Mediterranean theater and the European theater with the B-26s. Any other questions? Yes? Well, D-Day was an unusual thing because, you see the black and white stripes on any of these World War II airplanes. They were all put on the night of June the 5th, so that every airplane in the Allied forces had these black and white stripes on the morning of June the 6th. And we were all told if an airplane doesn't have stripes on it, shoot it down. So, because the Germans had nothing, even the pilots who were flying, when we came out that day, we saw these stripes, we didn't know what the hell this was. But we knew it was D-Day. Well, they said, well, maybe it's something special to D-Day. Well, in reality, it was. It was to signify what is an enemy aircraft and what's a friendly aircraft. And we all flew much different patterns than we normally flew. Normally, the B-26, of course, was designated as a medium bomber. We flew between 10 and 12,000 feet to do our bombings. The heavies usually flew 20, 25, 30,000 feet, whatever it was. They were only flying 6,000 to 8,000 feet. We had to fly 4,000 to 6,000 feet. Whatever some of the other bombers had designated was probably a different altitude, so we wouldn't be interfering with one another. We had more trouble on D-Day just trying to save our own skin from not running into our own airplanes because there were so many airplanes in the air. And I don't know what the actual number was, but I know there were thousands of airplanes in the air that day. And that's all my job was, to watch out for other airplanes. The pilot had to just make sure he stayed in whoever was flying just had to make sure he stayed in formation. And the other pilot had to make sure that they weren't going to run into any other airplanes. And all the boats and the ships that were in the ocean, in the channel, it was just overwhelming. It's hard to explain. Anything else? Yes?
When they have a fleet of planes out on there, ready to be flown down, I mean, if somebody gets on the radio and says pancake, what does that mean?
Have what?
Pancake.
Pancake. Well, I don't know what that... The only pancake I would know of is a guy's coming down to landing something, and he's in a place where there's not a good field. A pancake landing is just to sort of stall the airplane out as low as you possibly can so that it'll hit almost flat. And they call that a pancake landing.
This guy, when he was on a bombing mission, him and another guy were getting ready to go down, and he was ready to hit.
Yeah.
He told the other guys to pancake.
Yeah, well, that's probably what it was. You slide back and forth, and you try to get down, and try not to get too slow a speed, because if you make your turn, it's an arc, so you're traveling a little farther, a little faster, and that helps to keep you from just stalling out. So if you just increase the width of your turns and everything, you still have enough speed to prevent from stalling. But the minute you stall, you have to make sure that you drop the airplane this way and not this way or that way. So they refer to that as a pancake landing. You're welcome. Yes? No, we never flew high enough. The regulations were over 14,000 feet, you have to use oxygen. Well, we only flew 10 to 12,000 feet, and our airplanes did have superchargers on them that if they would have been hooked up properly and everything, they could have been used for higher altitudes, but we didn't need that because we were only a medium bomber. Yes? No, you can't find the B-26s flying. That's the whole problem. Oh no. The only airplane, the only warplane that was flying, I think, that was pressurized at the time was the B-29. B-29 was a pressurized airplane. Yes. Anybody else? How did I do?
Thank you. Watch out for the stairs, John.
Yeah. How did I do? Take too much time or not?
That's all. I'll take this from you.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me.
Yeah, sure.
John, hook you, sir.
Yeah.